They laughed at my divorce before the ink had dried. My name is Ayla Whitmore, and when you live in a coastal town where the wind carries everything, even whispers feel like weather. I signed the papers in a quiet office that smelled of lemon cleaner and old wood. The clerk nodded, my pen scratched, and suddenly my marriage to Evan was history. I walked out into a clear afternoon, breathing carefully, believing the worst part was over. I was wrong. By evening, my phone bloomed with messages like a field of thistles. A photo of me leaving the courthouse appeared in a group chat I never knew existed. Someone had zoomed in on my face, catching a moment between blinks, and the caption did the rest. Divorce Barbie, bargain brand. Another said I finally freed Evan to date an adult. His sister, Delia, dropped a laughing emoji that somehow felt colder than words. They were not content with ending. They wanted spectacle. At the weekly potluck, the women ladled soup and shared recipes, and I stood at the end of the line. Every spoon paused when I approached. Every conversation found a new direction when I stopped beside it. The volunteers had always saved me a chair by the window, a kind place to put my shyness. That night, a folded jacket sat there first. "Oh," someone said. "We didn't realize you'd still be coming." I nodded and leaned against the wall, a guest at my own exile. Evan's mother, Delia, glided through the room with a sugar-sweet smile. "New beginnings," she said to no one and everyone, our best faced with humility. She looked at me the way people look at mail addressed to the wrong house. I remembered the ring ceremony in their backyard, the white string lights humming like bees, the promise I believed we were both making. Turns out it was just me. I released the key to the house we owned together. I moved into a small apartment above a closed bookstore, where the sea rattled the windows at night. I could smell dust and salt and old paper. I made a bed out of boxes and stacked plates into a sensible pyramid. "It's temporary," I told myself, a sentence that kept me from crying in the stairwell. The first wound came when I tried to return to the Saturday market. I sell hand-thrown cups and bowls, the kind that carry quiet. My table sat untouched, though my glazes sang under the light. I watched people turn toward the stall where Evan's cousin sold candles labeled with inside jokes about my new status. Unhitched spice, cold feet cedar. Laughter moved the air. I kept my hands busy with twine, tying loops to nothing. Rumors traveled faster than gulls. I left, clutching a box of mugs that felt heavier than clay. At home, I placed one on the counter and turned it until the curve made sense again. When the kettle clicked, I poured hot water and waited for the glaze to deepen. The cup did not judge me. The cup did not ask what I had done wrong. In the silence, a single thought surfaced, careful and bright. Pain was loud in their mouths, but I did not have to be. Somewhere between the kettle and the window, I felt the first spark of tension settle into my chest, a taut string waiting to be plucked. There would be a time to speak. It just would not be on their terms. The consequences were not theatrical, only thorough. Evan changed his status, and the world adjusted around him like fabric around a mannequin. Friends we had collected over 6 years separated themselves from me like beads sliding from a snapped thread. If someone stopped to talk, they did it at an angle, as if my new life could stay in a coat sleeve. The worst of it was not the jokes. It was the invitations that never came. I learned about 3 dinners from the same photo. Delia at the center, Evan with a hand on her shoulder, my old friend Nora with her head thrown back in laughter. In the caption, Nora wrote, "Family is who shows up." The absence of my name was louder than any accusation. When I finally slept, I dreamed of stove burners left on, of empty rooms, of clean plates waiting for meals that never arrived. Work kept me steady. Clay offered proof of progress in a world that suddenly preferred gossip. In the studio I rented behind a bait shop, I pulled cylinders from spinning earth and coaxed them into forms that held. My palms took on a map of small abrasions. My shoulders ached in a way that meant I had used my strength well. The radio played gentle songs, and for hours I realized nothing outside the circle of my hands. But quiet does not protect you when a story has already been chosen. I found a note taped to my market permit, printed in narrow, official font. Several vendors have expressed concern about negative attention. For the harmony of the event, We are reallocating your booth. The coordinator signed with apologies. My place went to the cousin with the candles. The same woman who made a label called Spouses as Starter Homes snapped a selfie in my spot, her grin a fresh spring wound. I tried to be reasonable. I told myself people were choosing ease over courage, which is natural. I told myself a storm will find any loose window. Still, there were days my spine felt like a rung of brittle glass. The worst messages were private, sent from throwaway accounts that used my maiden name like a weapon. One called me a climber who had slipped. Another said I owed the town a refund for pretending to be better than my mother, who had left when I was 7. That last one made the clay go soft under my touch. I cleaned my wheel and went home early, hands trembling. In the hallway, Mrs. Klein from 2B left a bag of lemons at my door. She is the kind of neighbor whose kindness arrives like weather, unannounced and entirely appropriate. A yellow sticky note read, "Make tea, keep warm." I did, and wrote her a thank you in careful pen. The tea tasted like a small, clean truth. That night, I opened the file box that held my divorce papers. I flipped through the settlement I had not fully read, the language I had trusted my attorney to interpret. Delia's voice rang in my head, all honey and knives. New beginnings are best faced with humility. I had been humble. I had been silent. My reflection in the window watched me turn pages, like a librarian searching for an overdue apology. I listened to the sea shove the shore, patient and relentless. I knew there was a way through this that did not require a raised voice or a burned bridge. I had not found it yet, but I felt the path strengthening under my feet. In the dim kitchen, steam rose from my cup, and I whispered a vow I had never said out loud. I would not beg for my place. I would build it. The proof did not flash like lightning. It surfaced like a tide pool, ordinary until you looked closely. My attorney, Charlotte Ames, had a voice like a clear bell and a mind that could stack facts in neat columns. We had met once after the decree, but grief blurred the edges. I called her again, and she answered on the second ring. "Read your settlement," she said, "but do it with a pencil. Circle anything that draws breath." I spread the pages across my table. The contract smelled faintly of ink and the envelope it had lived in. There it was, tucked under the boilerplate, as if hiding from sentiment. Non-disparagement by both parties and their agents. Non-interference with employment or trade. Liquidated damages accruing per incident after notice. A signature from Evan, a signature from me, and, curiously, an addendum with Delia's precise handwriting. She had joined as an interested party because the family business had backed our down payment. Her name tied them to the bargain. I took photos of messages and flyers. I saved screenshots of candle labels and captions that made sport of my life. My neighbor's college-age niece, Harper, sat with me on the floor and taught me to archive content the way you collect shells, each time-stamped, each year and hour recorded. "You can't argue with a clock," she said, tapping at her laptop. We added the market coordinator's notice and the list of sponsors on the event website, where the family company's logo sat proudly in the corner. Charlotte studied the folder I sent as if it were a map to a quiet treasure. She called back with a pause that felt like a cloth laid gently over a bruise. "You have more than enough," she said. "We will give them the graceful option first. A letter attached to the contract, a cure period, and silence if they honor it. If they do not, the clauses you circled have teeth." I remembered the morning I first toured our old house, Delia guiding me past windows and oven racks. "Family is a hedge against weather," she said, touching a branch outside. Now the hedge was a wall, thorned and carefully tended. I had believed I had to climb it or accept the shade it forced upon me. Charlotte offered a door. We drafted a notice that spoke like I wanted to speak. It named the incidents, counted them precisely, attached images and posts, and extended a quiet hand. If public corrections were made and interference ceased, damages would not be pursued. If not, penalties would begin that same week, compounding like interest, not rage. Charlotte added one final sentence that changed the air in my kitchen. Per the addendum dated April 12th, the family company's obligations are joint and several. I did not sleep that night. I did not pace either. I cleaned my studio shelves and sharpened my trimming tools. I thought about how the wheel responds to patience and pressure, how clay remembers every touch. I thought about my mother leaving, and how people love to narrate a woman's choices as if they live in her bones. I thought about how silence is not always surrender. Sometimes it is breath before a note. At dawn, I slid the letter into an envelope and pressed the flap shut with the side of my hand. The sun lifted above the water, a coin being counted. I walked to the mailbox, and the hinge made a small, ceremonial sound. As the lid closed, the world did not change. It simply made room for the possibility that it could. They chose spectacle, of course. Delia invited me to what she called a restorative brunch. The word restorative stretched thin as pastry. I arrived in a navy dress that fit like a secret I could keep. Charlotte came too, her presence a quiet scaffold. The dining room held a view of the harbor and a table dressed like an apology. Delia poured coffee with a smile that showed every tooth. Evan sat to her right, handsome as a magazine, more lacquer than man. Two cousins hovered near the buffet, arranging fruit into precise geometry. Nora, my once friend, placed napkins as if arranging bandages. "We're glad you came, Ayla," Delia said. "We all make mistakes when emotions run high." Charlotte set her folder on the table. "I'd like to begin by acknowledging the contract you signed," she said, "and the addendum bearing your name." The room shifted, a small tilt you feel in your inner ear. Evan lifted a brow. "We're here to move on." "We are," Charlotte said, "by honoring commitments." She slid copies of the notice and the contract forward. A printed gallery of posts and labels followed, the evidence domestic as photographs after a vacation. "You have 7 days from receipt to cure." 36 posts remain public as of this morning. 9 labels are still for sale. 1 market organizer cites sponsor concerns. Each instance triggers the clause you accepted. Delia's smile cooled by degrees. "This is family business," she said. "It is," Charlotte replied, "as your signature confirms. Joint and several responsibility, Mrs. Whitmore. Failure to cure converts into liquidated damages on a schedule your accountant will find instructive." I watched without speaking. There was power in listening when others finally heard themselves. Nora glanced at me, color fading from her cheeks. One cousin shifted, then reached for a strawberry no one wanted. Evan's jaw worked. "You could have called me." "I did," I said. "You answered with a candle." For a moment, Delia tried to pity me. "You're still hurt," she murmured. "We forgive you." Her words floated like silk, designed to bind. Charlotte tapped the final page. "You'll also note the non-interference clause. The sponsor flag at the market satisfies the element. We will seek a written retraction and a restored booth, or the event joins the column labeled breach." Nora swallowed. "We didn't mean." I raised a hand. "The intent is not the point. The contract is." My voice surprised me with its even temperature. I was not hostile. I was a weather report, naming what already was. Silence spread, thin and crisp. Outside, a gull crossed the window, a white brushstroke on blue. Delia inhaled, set her cup down with exact control, and turned to Evan. "Fix it," she said. Her tone was no longer floral. It was stone. Charlotte gathered her papers. "We'll expect written confirmations and screenshots of corrections within 72 hours, given your proximity to the facts." She looked at me as if to ask whether anything else belonged here. I shook my head. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors. When I stood, the chair did not scrape. I thanked Delia for the coffee and stepped into the brightness of the entry hall. The harbor glittered. The air tasted faintly of salt and citrus cleanser. Justice had not arrived like a drumline. It had arrived like a metronome, counting every beat to where it belonged. As we left, Nora touched my sleeve. "I'll fix my part," she said. Her voice was small and real. I nodded. Charlotte held the door. The house exhaled behind us, its quiet no longer mine to carry. Some victories happen on paper and move through lives like weather fronts. Over the next week, corrections bloomed where ridicule had been planted. The cousin posted a photo of that same market table, the one she had taken from me, with a caption that named her mistake and asked people to visit my stall. The candle labels disappeared from the online store and reappeared with ordinary names. Cedar, that was just cedar. The market coordinator called me with a careful tone and offered my original booth back, plus a discount for the season. I said yes and thanked her, as if it were nothing. Evan wrote me a message that used punctuation like bandages. He said he had been careless, that he would abide by the contract, that he wished me well. He did not ask to meet. I did not offer coffee. Delia posted a general statement about kindness and community standards, a hedge trimmed into the shape of contrition. It was fine. It was enough. The accrual clock stopped. With the noise receding, my days found their shape again. I threw bowls meant for holding fruit, and cups meant for mornings, and a platter that looked like a tide had skimmed its rim. Harper came by and helped me set up a small shop website, where photographs showed the honest curve of each piece. Mrs. Klein hung a small sign in our lobby that read "Handmade upstairs," and people came in on their way home to buy a gift for a sister or a friend recovering from surgery. Money arrived with the quiet weight of solved arithmetic. I paid my rent on the first of the month and bought a new apron that did not remember the crash. On Wednesdays, I started teaching a class. For women, and one man learned to center clay, to breathe before pressing, to feel the moment a wobble becomes a line. We worked with the doors open. The sea kept us company, humming its old song. During breaks, someone watered the basil plant on my windowsill, and someone else refilled the pitcher without asking. Community can look like that, provisional and still real. Nora stopped by one Friday, carrying a box of pastries. She handed me a letter. I wanted to apologize like an adult, she said. The letter was simple and clean. She named what she had done, and she did not explain it away. She bought a vase and asked if we could someday be acquaintances again. We can, I said, and meant it as a path with a gate, not a promise. I kept the contract in the same file box, a spine among spines. It did not feel like a weapon anymore. It felt like a boundary I had learned to name. When you live in a town where wind carries everything, you learn to close your windows when you must, and to open them when the air is soft. On a morning bright enough to make the floorboards glow, I brewed tea and set a finished mug on the counter. The glaze had pooled in the carved lines, a tide tracing a shoreline. I thought of the girl who left the courthouse with a stranger's photo chasing her, embarrassed and hopeful, and I wanted to tell her something plain. Dignity is not quiet because it has nothing to say. It is quiet because it speaks only when it must. A gull cried outside. A child laughed on the sidewalk. The kiln clicked as it cooled, the sound steady and satisfied. I wiped my hands, unlocked the studio door, and watched the morning arrive. There was no triumph in it, only peace that had circled and found me ready. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge.